Good morning again. I'm Vas Vasiliadis with the Globus team, and it's my honor, privilege to introduce our keynote speakers. First up is Ian Foster, who probably needs no introduction, but for those that have not met Ian, he's co-inventor, co-founder, co-lead of Globus and many other things. He'll kick things off, and then following him will be Rachana Ananthakrishnan, who is the executive director and leads the Globus team at the University of Chicago. So Ian.
This seems to be working. Okay, thanks everyone for coming. It's great to see people in person, and also I know we'll be chatting online with those who are not here in person, and that's fine too. So I'm going to sort of just lead off by sort of reminding us what Globus is about, and saying a few things about what we've been doing, and then you'll hear much more from Rachana, who is really doing an amazing job leading this complex effort. So our theme for this year is enduring impact. We've been doing Globus for a long time. The Globus service was launched in 2010, but what's exciting for us is just seeing every year there's more and more use being made of the service and more impact on science, which is what ultimately we and the team at the University of Chicago are about. So why do we care about Globus, and why do we think it continues to be relevant, and indeed increasingly relevant in science and engineering? Well, I think it's because clearly data matters more than ever. When we started working in this area, there were a few extreme science groups that had to deal with a lot of data, and they needed help, and we developed services that benefited their needs. But now essentially every area of science and engineering is dealing with increasingly large data. Data rates are increasing at super exponential rates in some cases. There's more and more need for data integration across different parts of science. The teams that come together to create data and share data are larger, and therefore data needs to be distributed more and integrated more. AI is driving a whole new range of data needs. I mean, it's hard to believe that it's not that long ago that people were thinking, well, maybe our computers are fast enough, we won't need new supercomputers. But it turns out, well, now we are pulling together GPUs on unheard of scales in order to process data both in central locations and at edge devices. And of course, we also observe that, because of those needs, funders increasingly require data sharing. And so all of these things mean that data needs technology to make it easier to deal with. We need mechanisms for frictionless data collection, sharing, and analysis. And that's what we've been building for, more than 10 years now, the Globus platform service as a set of devices for eliminating data friction as much as possible, reducing it to acceptable levels where we can't do that. And you'll hear more about it. It's a set of services. We run them on the Amazon cloud, which turns out to be a wonderful platform for providing high availability, scalable, low cost services to many people. And then we deploy Globus servers on storage systems around the world. And in fact, in more than 80 countries, there are 39,000 active endpoints, 16,000, I think that's an undercount, connected institutions, more than 300,000 registered users, people who have done something with Globus. Every month we see 10,000 people doing something, moving data. We see people moving more than a petabyte per day nowadays. I remember getting very excited when our little counter first ticked over to 1 petabyte, which took quite a while, and now we're at every day that those data are moving. We're linked in with 1,400 identity providers, so you can connect to Globus using typically your campus credential or other credentials, and a variety of other neat capabilities. Just to remind you what we do. So Globus allows you to, first of all, to access data anywhere. It could be on your laptop, a cloud storage system, a local store in your lab, a high-performance computing system, some national resource, a scientific instrument, a Tate archive, any device that has got a Globus Connect server deployed on it or a Globus Connect personal endpoint can be linked into this universal data fabric. Once data is connected, we can then, I love, maybe I'm the only one who likes watching this tick over, but I've got a little video here, I hope. Where's my mouse gone? What do I have to do? No. I think I'm going to fail here. You see it on the projector? Ah, there we are. There we go. Yeah. Down there. I so much want to show this go. I can't see it. Oh, well. Oh, yeah, there we go. Just try one more second. Think that'll work? No. Oh, well. We'll have to do this later. So this is, but you go to globus.org and you can watch it tick over. It's very exciting. And okay, I guess I don't have many things exciting in my life, but anyway. The neat thing is Globus will move data, let you share data with others at speeds that not that long ago would seem miraculous, and with a reliability that would also seem miraculous. But you can do more than that. You can catalog data and search catalogs. People make increasing use of that. So you can just you can not only move data places, you can organize it, allow people to discover it, download it, and then something that's pretty new. We mentioned it briefly last year at this event. Is you can build multi-step flows that automate data collection, publication, cataloging, analysis processes. And we're seeing increasingly sophisticated flows of various sorts being built using these capabilities. And then you can use our nice web applications to do these things, or you can build your own applications with the platform. And you'll be hearing about some of the applications that people have built during this talk and during the this conference, and there are many more are described online. So just a few words of summary. What's happened over the last 12 months? There's sort of another year of COVID blur, of course, for many of us, but what's been, I think, exciting for us is just seeing the steady growth in what people are doing with Globus. So more people, the number of users increases, well, linearly, I would say. This is active users per month shown down here. We're just about at 10,000. Moving more data, networks are getting faster. There are more people moving things, more applications. They're moving it to more and more places, cloud storage, scientific instruments, not just HPC systems. More and more research facilities basically rely on Globus. They make it available to all their users, tell them that that's the way to move data in and out of their facilities. And then more and more applications that build on top of this, this Globus fabric. Let me just highlight, I think, 3 examples of interesting things that have happened. The Exceed project, the NSF Supercomputer Center Integration Project is reached the end of its 10-year run. So it's actually 11-year run. So it's maybe worth spending time just thinking about what that has achieved during that period. So when Exceed started back in 2011, this notion of a cloud-hosted data management service seemed pretty unusual and certainly unprecedented. Since then, we've got to the point where, well, you can read some of the stats here. We've seen people move close to 400 terabytes in one transfer. That was, I think, moving data from one sunsetting facility to another facility where the data would be hosted. 40,000 people have used Globus to move data in and out of Exceed facilities. So 40,000 have logged into Exceed apps, and 6,000 have transferred data to and from Exceed. Every month, 50 new people come on and start using it. And here's sort of some fun facts, I think. You know, Globus, of course, puts a lot of effort into detecting and responding and in fact, making transparent various classes of failure. So 1 in 17 transfers overcame some transient fault. That might be, you know, a network glitch, a file system that failed to deliver a file on time, or some other difficulty. And then 1 in 180 transfers overcame a checksum error. So as you may know, but if you're networking people, you may not, you know, the TCP checksum isn't really big enough to cope with petabytes of data. And so periodically one encounters errors that are not detected by the TCP checksum. But Globus, of course, does a more sophisticated checksumming operation. And so 1 in 180 transfers would have resulted in data being moved that with errors that would not have been detected if people were not using Globus. So that's a national facility that uses Globus on a very large scale. Something that you'll hear a bit more about from Forrest Hoffman a little bit later, that it's sort of a fun accomplishment over a more than 3-month period. A set of climate scientists replicated 7.5 petabytes of data from Livermore to Argonne and Oak Ridge National Labs. And it's sort of fun to watch the transfer going along. So the blue line is to Argonne, the red line is to Oak Ridge. You'll see some occasional glitches here. ALCF was down for an extended maintenance period, so the transfer continued but moved to Oak Ridge first and then back to Argonne when the network, when Argonne was back up and running again. At some point, there were errors due to misconfigurations of the GPFS storage system at Livermore, which slowed things down again, but then things continued. If you look at the slope of this curve, it's about 1.45 gigabytes per second, which is the rate limiting step. The storage system at Oak Ridge, at Livermore. But at other points when data was moved to Oak Ridge and then back to Argonne, we'd get bursts of up to 7.5 gigabytes per second. So imagine you were asked to move 29,000 files and 17,000 directories. So this was managed automatically by the Globus system. One more example. So Globus is used to move data back and forth, mundane but essential task in many purposes for many reasons. But increasingly we see it being used as a platform to build data services that manage data for large collaborative projects. So here's an example of that, the Materials Data Facility, an effort led by Ben Blazek of the University of Chicago, but involving many others, which uses Globus services under the covers. So they're not visible when you use it, but they're there handling data publication. So sucking data in from hundreds of sites across the US and internationally. That's using transfer and Globus Auth for authentication and authorization. Then implementing data ingest flows using Globus flows to extract metadata, perform quality control, prepare metadata packages, and then loading the results into a centralized database using Globus Search, which people can then query and download data from. So we've got, I think certainly, probably at this point, dozens of such platforms that have been built that provide data for different purposes. We'd like to see more. As you'll hear later, we're starting to integrate computation into this substrate as well, so that you can perform server-side computing on data rather than always having to download it. So let's see, do we have Yes. Oh, wait a minute. What's going on? This isn't working very well, is it? Okay. Oh, yes. Look, now what we wanted to do was put together a beautiful montage of all of the application pictures that we could find when we looked last night. So please admire our PowerPoint skills. But if you were to look carefully, what you'd see basically is a whole range of science projects of different sorts that have in common that they need to collect, aggregate, share large amounts of data, and that they build on these Globus platform services to do that in a way that's reliable, secure, and scalable. And we will be telling you about more such things during these few days, but we'd also like to ask you all to tell us about what you've been doing with it, so we can put additional pictures up in this this montage, because we know that there are many more applications that we aren't aware of. Okay, so let me hand things over to Rachana.
Okay. Thank you, Ian. Good morning, everyone. Yes, this is vastest idea of putting this in again last night. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. For everyone here in person, but also all of you here out there online, taking the time to join us here. So I'm going to do my best to answer this question. Ian did a really good job providing an overview of the Globus capabilities. So I'm going to use that and provide some highlights across the different product areas and what has happened over the last year, and then shift focus to a question that I already got asked this morning. What are you guys going to do next? So that's going to be the second half of the presentation. So I'm going to start with Globus Connect Server. This, for those of you new to Globus, this is the piece of software that essentially enables your storage to get plugged into our ecosystem to leverage all of the functionality that we provide for data management. Version 5 was a new architecture. Well, not new anymore. It's been around for 2.5 years now. And we are seeing a lot of this use in production. Functionality ranging from high assurance data access. So if you have PHI protected data, using that for using Globus for managing that. Multiple storage types. So being able to support different storage types across your single DTN pool and shared infrastructure. So you're not procuring new servers. We are also seeing integration with existing OpenID Connect servers. So if institutions that already have identity providers or OpenID Connect providers using that for authentication rather than using X5 and 9 certificates for user authentication. Right? HTTPS access. Ian talked a lot about bulk data movement. GridFTP is certainly the workhorse there, but there is a need and use cases for providing interactive data access, and HTTPS access comes with version 5. And the last one is moving from our much loved UUIDs for identifying all the endpoints to being able to use domain names. So now collections can be referenced using user-friendly domain names as opposed to sort of those identifiers that we use, right? We're seeing a steady adoption of V5. The graph here starts with the very first release. Initially, it was used for sort of marquee use cases, right? If you needed protected data, then V5 was used. If you needed a connector, that we released only with version 5. But now version 5 is feature parity with version 4. So everything you can do with version 4, you can do in 5. And all new installs are using version 5, right? And we are ready for migration. So all the deployments of version 4 out there, we are ready for you to migrate over to the new version. Whether you're deploying, it's POSIX deployments only right now, but whether you're using it with sharing enabled, whatever your configuration, whatever authentication system you're using, you should be able to migrate that over. And we have tools for migration. I know some of you have already started. I saw some support requests come in when this was released a couple of days ago. So these migration tools will ensure that there is no user intervention required when you move. So no user should have to deal with this move at all. All of the configuration will be preserved. And essentially there should be the way it is organized, there should be a small downtime for when you point it to the new server, but you should be able to set up a version without taking a large downtime, right? there is a session tomorrow morning on GCS5 install. For those of you who have not done that before or new to that, discussion of the architecture and an overview of all the migration tools. And we have set up some EC2 instances where you can try to install and hands-on follow along as well, right? So there'll be a lot more details on this, but we are ready to get all of the production deployments moved over to the new version. If you are an administrator, this is probably a favorite part of the Globus web app for you. This is the management console, which essentially provides a view into all the activity that is happening on the Globus endpoints at your institution. It provides you a way for you to monitor, debug, be able to audit, look at all the debug any support requests that you get from your users. It has now been upgraded and moved into our main web app. We're really excited. This was a pretty long effort. In addition to meeting accessibility standards, a refresh of the user experience, this also makes it work with the version 5 architecture. So there is a change in architecture and terminology, and the console gets us there, right? Again, in tomorrow morning session, we will do a demo of this, go over this in detail for those of you who are looking for more information on this. We have a connector announcement every year. This was something we released late last year. We released support for the Microsoft Azure Blob storage. And these slides are starting to get a little boring. Every slide has a new connector, and then we say the same thing. Pretty much you can do everything you can do with any other storage system, right? Move data, be able to access this using, share it with share data sitting there using the Globus ecosystem. So it's sort of the single pane of glass across all of this. But this is interesting because it rounds out all our major cloud providers, right? We now have connectors for all the major cloud providers, and we are definitely seeing a growth in adoption of the connectors, right? So this is our current slide of the set of connectors that are supported, and about 44% of all subscribers of Globus have at least one connector in their subscription. So there is, more than POSIX is being used. And interestingly, close to about 18 to 20% of them actually have more than one. So they are sort of seeing the diversity of storage system and wanting to provide that interface to their users, right? So I'll give a shout out to a panel this afternoon that Bob Flynn from Internet2 pulled together, where there's sort of this discussion about this different storage systems and what is a race to the lowest cost storage system that has happened over the last 2 years, right? It's been, I think we're going to have a lot of we're going to have panelists from multiple institutions tell us how they're approaching this and how they're looking at it. But from a Globus platform perspective, we provide this uniform interface and a consistent user experience. So irrespective of the credentials, the quotas, the API limits, all of that is completely shielded for the user. So we are increasingly seeing it used for migrating workloads. So you need to move data from one cloud provider to another because you're computing in something else, or you're just simply migrating data off one to the other. And we have seen that over the last couple of years. I think we've had 2 big, large migrations from providers as they've changed the cost models for their storage, right? So I'm looking forward to this panel this afternoon. So we'll hear a little bit more on what the campuses are thinking there. The last highlight on sort of our data transfer piece is the timer service. If you're following our release, we released a way for you to set scheduled or recurring file transfers. This is something that a lot of the users had asked for. It's really a hosted cron, right? So Globus manages sort of this recurring transfers. We released this a little while ago, and interface on the web application, so you can set this up with just a few clicks, was made available last year. And I thought this was interesting. So this is a graph of adoption of this feature, right? How many people are setting and using timers? And as you can see, sort of there's this slow, the admins who really asked us for it, who really can handle the CLI and want to set it up, you saw adoption there. Then the black line there around November 2021 is when the web app team added this as a feature on our web app, and then it just rocketed up, right? This just sort of reinforces it's not even whether the tool is available, the right tools are available, but once you have accessible interface, right? When you can lower the barrier you're going to have people leverage a lot of this functionality. So you could have argued, well, most researchers are not going to set up a recurring transfer, but actually they wanted to, they just didn't have an easy way of doing it, right? You can sort of see it really took off once we have it in our web app. I'll come back to that as a theme later in my talk as well. Stepping away a little bit from our data transfer and that piece, I'm going to talk about the other platform pieces. So Ian talked about lots of other services that we provide functionality on, and so I'm going to touch on highlights from those, right? This one refers to our Globus Auth service, which is our fundamental identity and access management service that is used by all our services, but also other applications that are built on the Globus platform, right? We continue to see adoption and growth on that service. The numbers just keep increasing. But one highlight last year was the work that we did with the National Institute of Health, integrating their researcher auth service. So I would describe the researcher auth service as sort of a identity and access broker, if you will. In addition to providing an authentication assertion when a user comes in, they also include some information about permissions that the user has for data access. And right now it's mostly data that is managed by NIH. And the work that we did was to integrate Globus Auth with the RAS service so that Globus Auth could receive these assertions, the permission information. And now we can turn it around and provide it to downstream applications that are built on Globus Auth, right? These use a standard, it's called Globus, Global Alliance for Genomics and Health, GA4GH. That's the way that they make this information available to downstream services. And then in turn, we actually pick up the information from those permissions and hand it down to downstream services, right? Now you can imagine those downstream services then using this permission either to drive usability measures, being able to provide the right interfaces, but also in the future, being able to enforce authorization. Are you allowed to access this data at all, right? So this is a long effort, both in terms of technology, the integration was easier, but as with everything security, we had to work with them on a security agreement, on operational security, because we are crossing boundaries here, and we have that integration in place now. Moving on to a completely different service, Globus Search. Again, we have a platform service for data discovery, and the service is it's again a hosted service for you to be able to do metadata indexing and discovery of data. And one interesting piece about the Globus Search service is it also provides visibility and access control on the metadata. So you can decide who gets to who sees what data and what metadata on the search results, right? One of the highlights from last year was adding geospatial search into the Globus Search service. So now you can come in and do bounding box queries and support JSON formatting for essentially doing queries against the data that's available, right? This screenshot is from our friends in Canada. This is a group of federated, FRDR, Federated, I forget, Research Data Repository, thank you. So that's a group that provides a central repository that indexes data from all kinds of different domains. And one thing that they wanted to support for some of the domains was this GeoSearch, right? So they've added that in. They also use lots of other features, language stemming, filtering, and faceting to be able to provide a scalable search infrastructure for their users, right? This is a great example of platform use. There is no Globus web app here. It's completely their portal and their application that leverages, Globus transfer, Globus auth, and search in the backend. This is the last platform piece. I'm going to do an update that refers to a set of services that we have for managed automation. This is relatively new. It was released in production a year ago. So I'm going to just take a minute here to provide an introduction to these services and then talk about what we've done over the last year. So the goal here is to be able to provide a hosted service to provide managed automation across heterogeneous resources, right? The flow service essentially lets you define a task pipeline, orchestrates that and executes that on your behalf. So for example, if you're trying to process data that is coming out of an instrument, there are multiple tasks that potentially go across different resources. You're staging data, you're doing some analysis of the data, potentially you're having someone validate that the analysis looks right. You're maybe extracting metadata, putting it in a search index. So there are these activities that happen that go across different resources and different services, right? The flow service allows you to define that and and essentially have the hosted service manage the execution of those. And each step in the flow is called an action. Globus provides providers for these actions. For example, we have a provider for moving data, for being able to ingest to a search index, being able to set permissions, but it's completely extensible. So you can write your own provider and make this customized, right? So that's the core idea behind the service. It's a platform service, but we also have interfaces from our UI to be able to run and manage these, right? So the first thing typically someone does here is create and deploy a flow that uses declarative language, sort of JSON, to write what those steps are, what the interdependencies are, and you can have branching, you can have loops. So it's a pretty full-fledged state machine that you can define here. Then you also can set an input schema that determines what input is needed to run this flow, and also set policy, who's allowed to run these, who's allowed to manage them, monitor them, everything you would expect from a resource here, right? In the past year, we enhanced the web app to be able to do what we're calling guided input. Using the input schema that has been set up for a given flow, dynamic forms are generated to guide a user to be able to provide input to run these flows, right? So you see an example here on the right-hand side of the screen, where essentially you're looking at data types. So we're able to guide the user do validation at input step itself as they start a flow, right? The screenshot on the left shows you a little bit more there, where we are using custom types. So if we know it's a Globus collection or a Globus path, we are able to provide even better UI elements. So you're able to browse a collection, select the path, and essentially reduce errors, right? So this is going to definitely reduce the barrier rather than making people provide a JSON input, which you still can do if you're an advanced user. This definitely reduces the barrier for being able to actually start these flows and use them. But flows are not always started from the web UI. The biggest use case we have is where they are automatically started, right? Data is coming off of an instrument. Once you have sufficient data sets, you want to trigger a flow to process it, right? Or you're looking for a file creation event that runs a flow that processes it. Once you look at it that way, now you're suddenly racking up a lot of these runs, and you need a way to come in and manage them at scale. So that's the second enhancement on the UI this year, focusing on facilities that are providing these flows for managing data pipelines. How would an administrator or someone who has lots of different flows come in and use this? It's almost a little bit like management console if you want to think about it that way. So here we are using our own search service. All the runs are being indexed in our search service, which gives us a highly flexible way to essentially filter and find runs of interest and cohorts of interest, right? So this one looks at being able to provide range queries, runs that have started between this period of time, status of runs, and so on. But we also introduce the idea of tagging. So you can associate tags with your runs when you start them, so you can start to classify them, right? The tags here used are specific to a particular experiment or a modality, and you can have multiple tags. So I can come in and say, across my facility, give me all flows, all runs that have failed, or across a particular beamline in my facility, give me all runs that have had failures in the past year, right? So essentially allowing you to be able to hone in on these runs. So there'll be more discussion about this, and Vas is going to lead a tutorial on creating and running these flows and all of that tomorrow in the afternoon. And then the last piece on the flows is we are starting to think about, so the flow service is really platform. You define your flow and then you run it. But are there more pre-baked flows that Globus can provide and host so that you don't have to even define them, you come and run them, right? A couple of obvious ones for us. For example, the one on the second screenshot there is a move flow. So there is being able to move data from one location to another, and then once it's been successfully moved, delete the copy on source, right? So it's pretty simple, you would think, two-step flow, but it has sufficient error handling and making sure the data was successfully transferred and so on, right? So this is something that we make available. Anybody can go and just run it. You don't have to do the flow definition or manage all of that, right? Okay. So that's a very brief highlights of some of the big things across the various product areas. We do push release notes to our discuss list, And you probably see an email every week there with some updates or the other and maintenance across all of these services, right? But this kind of gives you some of the big ones that has happened over the last year. So I'm going to shift gear here. I want to talk a little bit about where are we going? What sorts of things are we planning on doing over the next year and beyond, right? Before that, I want to touch on some of the things that are happening in the community, some of the areas from which we are getting input and see use cases and feature requests that are motivating and influencing our product strategy and roadmap, right? So there are about 5 or 6 ideas here that I'm going to present, and then I will talk a little bit, I'll talk about the product roadmap itself. So the first one, probably most of you have heard of this. National Institute of Health has a data sharing and data management policy that is going into effect early next year, right? This essentially requires that anybody who's funded by NIH make all their data available for public use. So essentially put their data out there so others can use it. This is really interesting in so many facets for us and drives so many opportunities, right? First, from a researcher perspective, how do they meet this mandate? Do they have the tools to make the data available, to make it, where are they going to put the data, store it, make it available, and so on? And then the more interesting opportunity is we suddenly are going to have a huge cache of very valuable biomedical data now available for use, right? How do you leverage that? How do you find where it is? How do you access it? How do you pull that into your analysis and so on, right? So we see a lot of opportunities here to be able to provide services and tools and support the researchers in this mandate, not only to make it available, but also put it to good use. Second one, closely related to this one, is this making the data, what does it mean to put the data out there and how do you make it useful for the researchers, right? Again, I'm going to call it, this is a FAIR data is probably most familiar to this community. FAIR stands for findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable data, right? So how do you make the data available to meet all those attributes? Some of the work that we have done, for example, with ESNet around the modern research data portal, making the data accessible, we've gone a long way there, right? Once you know where the data is, we made it easy for you to get the data and pull the data in, but that's still a human in the loop. It's human accessible data. So how do you shift the paradigm to think about programmatic access to data, to make it ready for machine learning and AI, metadata management, and also findability of the data, right? I can access it once I find it. So there is still a lot that could be done in that space around the findability of the data, and then the rest of sort of the metadata pieces. Stepping away from that, a slightly different piece here is streamlining access to cross-institutional resource, right? This is something that has been worked on for a long time, but we are seeing renewed efforts to try to understand what a researcher's workflow is and what their needs are when they actually use resources that are across security boundaries. So typically, a lot of the resources or a lot of the infrastructure that sits in these institutions have their own local policy. Each of them has their own APIs and interfaces to access that creates a lot of friction when you're trying to do something that crosses all these boundaries, right? Recently, there is a DOE effort called the Integrated Research Infrastructure, where they're trying to understand all this from a user perspective, sort of a user-centric design, and create architecture blueprints to be able to support research that crosses all of these, right? So efforts like that are going to need security infrastructure that's interoperable, federated authentication, being able to cross all of those, and then also data backplanes that are interoperable. So having uniform interfaces so you can build things on top of that, right? Again, this presents great opportunities for us in terms of providing sort of services and tools in this space. Now, building off of that use case, so now imagine you have to cross these different facilities or use things across different institutions and different resources. We are seeing a lot of facilities who are building services or want to build services that do automated and system-driven data management, right? And what I mean by that is trying to provide services that are transparent to their users. So the user submits a job, but transparently the data is moved to the right storage tier within the institution to be able to complete the compute, right? So moving it to scratch just when it is needed, and deleting the data when it's done. Another great example of this is from the Joint Genome Institute out of Berkeley. They have a use case for being able to move the compute jobs across multiple national labs wherever capacity is available. Right? In that case, they have to be able to stage the user's data into the right location so that they can actually compute for the user. But all of this is done without the user in the middle. So you're looking at full automation without any manual processes, security paradigms around that, and also capacity planning for something like this, right? This is not a single user using services, but it's sort of this acting on behalf of a bunch of users. So again, lots of interesting platform use cases have come out of discussions with facilities who are looking to do this. This one is on compute. Ian talked a lot about data, but we are also looking at the compute space, and you can definitely see a big push to trying to reduce the barriers for using compute systems. The slide I put up on web interfaces for timer service and dramatically increasing its usage, so the same thing you can apply here, right? If we can reduce the barrier and provide usable interfaces for compute access, you're going to see big changes there. Open on Demand is a project that comes to mind as a fantastic example where they're looking to sort of provide this web interface for accessing the compute systems. But if you can look beyond that and think about navigating multiple compute systems, right? The different credential requirements and interfaces, how do you provide users with tools and interfaces for them to be able to navigate those things, right? Again, that presents, I think, a fantastic opportunity. And then the last one, least but really critical, is sort of the security and privacy and compliance that undercuts everything that I mentioned earlier, right? The arc is definitely moving towards more data protections and security requirements. We see GDPR requirements from our European friends, but also a lot of the states here in the US have privacy laws that are at par or moving in that direction as well. A lot of the research data, we are seeing more data use agreements and data security requirements come out there. How do we allow simplified navigation of this, right? Being able to scale from highly protected to other data use agreements requirements. How do we provide tools and services that can navigate that? So I think these are a set of things that have come out of the community and conversations, use cases that are driving the kinds of things that we plan to do on the platform and try to support some of these use cases, right? I'm going to step to the product back again and just go over several roadmap items, things that we have planned on working on. Again, these are highlights. These are not exhaustive at all, but kind of give you an idea of where we plan to spend time and put things in the product. And we would love to hear from you on this. A lot of this is influenced by community input, conversations with you. So reach out to us and let us know what your needs are and what you're looking at with how you're deploying Globus and what we could be doing further to help you derive value from the product. So the first one here I'm going to talk on is the data access and sharing platform. So on Globus Connect server, several of you have talked to us about completely automating the install of the server, right? And I think there are a couple of use cases there. One is around being able to automatically add data nodes as you add more DTNs and remove that. So automating that. But also we have had use cases for complete new installations. So people who are looking to do this for CI/CD systems or cloud systems, being able to completely automate how that is set up and tear down, right? So that's something that's on the roadmap. IPv6, I know there is a looming deadline for a lot of our users, federal agencies and labs. So that is definitely on the cards for work this year and supporting that. Then the next two bullet items there are pretty cross-cutting. It talks about dedicated capacity for facilities and streamlining custom authorization, right? This really refers to some of the use cases I talked about where facilities are trying to do fully automated managed data for users. So where they're trying to do this as a facility rather than as an end user. And also being able to bring in authorization and attributes from other services into the Globus ecosystem and using that for making decisions, right? NIH RAS is a fantastic example of that, but there are lots of other CI projects, cyber infrastructure projects that have how do we sort of bring that into the ecosystem for integrating with Globus, right? So one of the things here we're thinking about is how do we, so right now transfer service has some limits for per user limits. Essentially, this is resource preservation. We want to make sure we don't get DDoS. But if you look at it from a facility perspective, when you're acting on behalf of users, those limits are truly limiting, right? So we need to figure out how we can provide some dedicated capacity and increased access for those facilities. So those are some directions we're going to be pushing this year. User interfaces, I mean, there's continuous improvements that happens on our user interfaces, whether it's our web app or the CLI. We probably see something that happens every week on there based on either user feedback or new things that we are adding, right? But two big things that we would focus on. The first one is sort of this idea of personalized search and an interface for the user, right? Here's a screenshot. I want to be careful. This is a screenshot of a wireframe. So this is not in production or even in sandbox. So this is conceptual. To think a little bit about when users come in and log into the Globus ecosystem, we have some information based on their authentication, right? How can we guide them to say, okay, these are resources that may be of interest to you. These are resources that you might have access on. So those are sorts of things that we are thinking about so that with the growing set of collections, I mean, Ian talked about, I think 30,000 active collections out there. It's quite a lot of resources for a user to navigate and find out what's of interest, right? How can we provide a little bit more personalized view? So that's one space. We've been giving it a lot of thought. We hope to move on that this year. Flow authoring. So I talked about writing flows is essentially uses declarative language. So you use JSON or YAML to write these flows. Today it's something that you use our command line for. You write the definition and then use the command line to deploy it. We'd like to bring in more interfaces for that in the UX to make it simpler for you to construct these flows and also potentially reuse flows that other people have written, right? Take that and then modify that for use. Globus CLI, I think much loved by some people who use it and send us lots of good feedback and requests. So continues to grow. We had a major version release last year, 3.0 version that had a lot of token handling and updates for GCS5. When we do new services like timers and flows, we tend to start with separate CLI packages for that because they're evolving faster, they're in beta. So now we're ready to merge all those in. So you should see a lot of all of these packages come together, and so the single Globus CLI namespace will have all of the GCS pieces, timers, and the flows piece. Right? Platform as a service. This is definitely an area that we have seen huge growth over the last year. I see a talk icon here. We have, I think, a couple of presentations just in this one day here. You will hear about Globus capabilities integrated into somebody else's application or portal, right? And we are supporting quite a few of these over the last 6 years. Oh, sorry, last 6 months. So this has been a goal for Globus from the very beginning. If you joined us in 2011, you would know that we always thought about this as a SaaS and a PaaS, and we have been cognizant of that, made open APIs, SDKs available, and think about how you can take parts of the Globus ecosystem and use it in your infrastructure, right? You don't have to use the whole SaaS piece. So it continues to be a place that we think investment needs to happen, and we think that this is where growth is going to be. There are a few things that I want to highlight here. The first one is this configuration-driven customized interface, right? And what I mean by that is there are universities or there are instrument facilities, there are projects where they want to use most of the Globus pieces. So they're looking for some subset of the functionality, but the whole web interface is too overwhelming for their users to come in and do just a small few steps, right? So in partnership with Michigan, we started exploring this idea of taking the Globus UI. So it's still the Globus interface. They are not building any new application themselves, but providing these streamlined workflows, right? That just have the right number of steps. Maybe it also has pre-configured pieces. So you don't have to think about which collection you're acting on or who you need to give access. It's all pre-configured for you, right? So this is the first version of it, of this that we did with the web app team, and the rendition is completely driven by a configuration, right? So user comes in, there are guardrails that just take them through the flow and they're done. So they don't have to figure out how to do this in the main interface. So we are looking to leverage the dynamic forms that I talked about in the flows piece, where we are able to take these schemas and render these forms. We're hoping to leverage that to be able to provide more of that functionality to the user base, right? So you don't have to have us build this, but rather you can come in and build these flows, and then you will get a interface that is more tailored for your user experience. So I think this is really exciting. This is more sort of, you don't have to build. Let's get you to a point where you're able to configure and get interfaces, right? Rather than write your own applications. On the developer experience enhancements, the second bullet here, it's across the board, right? Improving our developers.globus page to make it more easy for you to navigate and use it, automating some of that pieces there. The SDK, again, the Globus SDK had a major version release last year, and we continue to build out helper methods and pieces there. Token management is a big part of the SDK now. So we continue to think about how do we provide these higher level constructs for you to be able to use the Python SDK in your applications, while still giving you the flexibility to do things, even at the lower level. For example, managing how your HTTP request is created. It's still supported in the SDK, but we also provide higher level abstractions, so you don't have to worry about those things, right? One of the big things for us this year is we are planning on providing some JavaScript SDKs. This is something that has been on our back burner for a little bit. We've been talking about this. There's a lot of integration that happens where they use the Python SDK as a guide and then build out all the client side in JavaScript. So we would like to do that, provide this as something that you can leverage and use, right? And then, as always, the never-ending task of documentation, right? Trying to make sure how we can keep improving our developer documentation, providing blueprints and sample code. So how can we, again, reduce the barriers so you can quickly leverage our capabilities? Managed automation, this is the flow service and the ecosystem around it. We will add action providers for all of the other Globus functionality. I think we have about 6 or 7 out there, and we'll continue to keep adding that so you can construct these flows and use the work that we've done. The timer service is very interesting because it is architected as a way to be able to start any flow. And right now, the only flow it starts is something that starts a transfer, right? But you can now imagine being able to essentially set a timer to be able to start a flow. And that's something that we want to be able to support, and then generalize it as a trigger service. Idea behind a trigger service is being able to consume events and process events and react to them by starting flows, right? So you set a condition that says, if you get a file creation event for a file with extension X, trigger this flow, right? So if you're an instrument facility and you know this is how your data set collection ends, you should be able to set those permissions there. And then the last one is supporting high assurance data handling. So being able to use the automation services for that. So that's a stood up. That means I'm supposed to be done, and I'm not, but I'm almost there. So that's some of the product pieces. Some of the other work that we have done is around these data portals. We have frameworks to support people building their own data portals. I talk a lot about the modern research data portal. This is the paradigm for how do you make data accessible at scale. And given some of the motivation that I gave for the work we are doing this year, findability or discovery of data is a big part. So we have added that into these portals. How do you come in and discover the data, not just download and access it? And there's going to be a whole session on this tomorrow. There's a tutorial and presentation, and there's a Django Globus portal framework. It's an open source framework that's available for you. So you get a start on being able to build these out, right? And then the last one is managed compute. You heard some about this last year at the keynote. This is work that is being led by Kyle, the Globus Labs team, and we are looking at how do we provide managed compute just like we provide management of data. So FunkX allows you to have these compute endpoints and these various compute endpoints across diverse. I guess I have to use compute again. So diverse compute locations, right? So whether you're moving from your laptop to a supercomputer or to a HPC system, and be able to run functions, essentially Python function on any of these endpoints. And there's a cloud hosted service that provides the management and the reliability layer, much like transfer does for data, right? Kyle will provide a detailed overview of this, but also solicit input from the community on what you would like to see. So Kyle and Ben have a talk later this afternoon to provide a more detailed introduction to the service itself, but also hear from you on what you would like to see in the compute space and what sort of features we can build into this, right? Okay, the last part of this presentation is probably the most important part of this presentation, is how do we keep ourselves sustained and keep doing this, right? So a big part of the mission is to deliver all of this in a sustainable way, and we have made this the center of our mission from the very beginning. And we talk about this as making sure we are able to thrive, not just survive, and be able to reinvest and bring more value to the platform, to the users, right? So being able to build on it as opposed to just sort of this maintenance piece that involves setting up a team of right size and right skill set and so on. So that remains a core piece of our mission. And thank you to our subscribers. We are certainly seeing a good support from our subscribers and a diverse set of subscribers, right? Universities still remain a big portion of those who subscribe to Globus, and about 46% are R1. Some of the bigger R1 are the large research universities here. We certainly have seen uptake with national labs. A lot of the DOE national labs are subscribers, and so are some of the agencies, government agencies as well. And with our protected data and HIPAA data handling, we are sort of seeing that growth in the medical centers and hospital systems as well, right? So certainly there's a little bit more diversity in our subscription pool, and we are sort of seeing steady growth. It remains a freemium service. So I got to say that vast majority of use is still on the free, free tier, but certainly there are a lot more subscribers there supporting us in there. Then I will end with a thank you to funders. We still get grants for some of the new work that we are doing, like FunkX that is working on the compute piece. A lot of the automation was supported that way as well. So thank you to funders as well. Thanks, everyone. How are we doing Q&A?
Thank you.
So we'll take Q&A from the room first.
We'll take questions from the room, and for those online, if you want to put your questions in the Q&A, we'll take a couple of questions because we're right at time. But any questions? I'll repeat them for those online.
We don't have break for 15 minutes.
Oh, that's right.
We have 15 minutes.
We do have plenty of time for questions. Yes. Okay,
that's
so
Gigi, everyone, who's our help desk. So. So sorry, the question is there an end of life for GCS version 4? Why did we think we were going to ask this question? So there isn't an announced end of life for V4 right now. I expect that we are going to run this migration effort for a few months, try to get all of you to move ahead there and move to V5 before we set a firm date. We would like for all of the V4 endpoints to get moved over and V4 support discontinued by this year. But I appreciate that it's production infrastructure for all of you, and many of you have large DTN deployments. So we will work with the community on this, but certainly I and the engineering team certainly hopes that all of you will move so we can remove some code. So thanks, Gigi. Other questions? Yes, Todd. So talk about the agency project. One of the motivators behind that is we have a lot of graduate students that are engaged. Shared endpoint is now important. Mm-hmm. Something processes that will help us take ownership. For my brain. Yeah. So to repeat the question, Todd talks about, so I mentioned the customized interfaces we are developing for Michigan. He talks about graduate students who come in and create these shared endpoints or guest collections in V5. And then when they leave, these guest collections are orphaned because their accounts are disabled, right? And you were asking whether we have processes to be able to recoup them. I'm not sure I would say we have processes to recoup them. Some of the work that has happened, and you'll hear about it tomorrow, we've provided more administrative permissions to be able to manage those guest collections. So there is ability to be able to delete them, even find them, audit them and delete them. I know Carl has done some work in that space. But to be, we don't have anything automated to be able to essentially recoup or migrate those pieces. I think it would be interesting. We could maybe think about this from a flow perspective, because we need a trigger. We need to know when this account is disabled, then run these set of steps, right? So I can totally see this being implemented as a flow, where when your system account, when you disable that grad student's account, you run some steps, whether it's deleting those guest collections or migration is not something we do today. But that's if truly you wanted to preserve the guest collection, which is a logical construct on the data, then we'd have to think about migrating. But if you want to just delete the guest collection, but the data still is there, that's something we could do as a background process using the automation service.
So that makes me think of actually something on the authentication side, which is like right now for Stanford, anybody who wants to use Globus logs in for the first time. That creates their Globus identity for Stanford. We are very much pushing people to use Workit as well. That's another identity provider that uses it. And with some work that I'm working on over the last few weeks, we're looking at pre-provisioned Stanford user in Globus Office. So without them even logging in. So that's more identities being created just over time. How is that working with you guys in terms of managing the constantly ever increasing number of identities?
To paraphrase and repeat the question, Stanford is looking at being pre-provisioning identities in Globus Auth rather than having the user log in for the first time and then have an account on the Globus system. And your question is about what it does to our service, sort of the scale and ever growing because we don't have a notion of deprovisioning. Is that sort of?
It ties it exactly with guest collection.
I see. When the user leaves.
The user leaves, they have a lot of guest collections that might be or personal. Globus Connect personal.
Yeah.
It's the same on the identity side.
Yeah, fair question. So actually, I think fundamentally the discussion to be had is why are you pre-provisioning to begin with? Because the way most of our system is set up, whether it is, for example, setting permission for a user to access data in the Globus ecosystem or giving them administrator or monitor rights, we don't really need to have the user have logged in first, right? You can set permission and then the user gets provisioned or claims their identity when they come back in. So I'm not fully convinced that I don't know your use case, so I'd like to understand why a mass pre-provisioning is required. So that's, I think, something we could definitely discuss. From a deprovisioning perspective, we do have a notion of deleting accounts. A user can request for their account to be deleted. We have an interesting challenge here because a user, so there is sort of this institutional identity that comes in, like you are saying this person is Stanford, but the user may have linked other identities in there. And they may continue to use Globus, and most of them do when they move institutions, right? So writ mass for us to just sort of delete their account puts them in a bind. You've sort of deleted other resources. So it'll be interesting to hear if there are other sort of institutionally managed pieces, and you want to be able to provision, deprovision only Stanford identity. We should certainly talk some more to figure out how we can support that while still ensuring that we don't wipe the user's, Globus universe, because they might be using it in lots of different ways, right? So that's only a discussion. It also, I think, touches on enterprise GCP, which is something that I know we have had some use cases, right? So enterprise managed Globus Connect personals, so that it is linked to your institution, and then that particular, so we are here, I'm seeing thumbs up in the room. So that's something that I know we have had some use cases as well. So definitely those are areas to explore. Any online questions?
Yes, go ahead.
You mentioned that Globus Service 5 is now feature
Yes, actually, it includes all the connectors, and HPSS, I think, was released just in time for me to say this today. So, so yes, we have HPSS as well. No, so everything is supported. So to be careful, if you're installed for migration, it's POSIX only right now. So if you're migrating, you know, a V4, then it has to be a POSIX only, because the migration tools haven't had all the connectors, but that's something that we will add very soon. Actually, I think finally we have a microphone, so.
Yeah, I was just thinking, when you talked about the NIH policy to have the sharing of all the information, and if we have this concept of people don't have to move their data in order to share it and make it accessible, and then people leave, like just wrapping my head around how that might work is something, if you can talk about it a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's quite the challenge. Oh, yes. Mm-hmm.
Helen Dua from Harvard.
So I think that's quite the challenge. The idea of data repositories help with that, and not to think about that in terms of just papers, but actually, you know, repositories where there is management of the data by a more neutral account, right? So it's not tied, it's not sitting in the user's account when they leave and it gets wiped, or worse yet, on the user's laptop, right? So I think the data sharing policy, it is very interesting because it also requires the user to think through that and provide a plan when they apply for the funding. So I presume the direction that it's going to go is, or I hope the direction that it's going to go is that either institutionally or for domains. I mean, I think a lot of the biomedical domains have their own repository where you're required to deposit the data. But for cases where it's not, that there are either institution provided repositories or other catch-all repositories. And NIH has a generalist repository effort that's going on where people are depositing the data, and then it's made more widely available as opposed to from the user's machine itself, right? Then comes the question of quality of that data. If I tar up everything and put it there, that's a whole different thing. But I think that's sort of the direction. In which case, I think some of the work that we have done with the portals, you know, being able to provide a search index for some of that, being able to stand up something like that is findable and accessible, all come into play, and also makes it interesting for large data access. Right? So that's how I think the direction might go, but maybe others have thoughts on that as well.
And I would also like to encourage our online participants to submit their questions via the Q&A. Any other questions in the room?
So speaking of orphaned users, right? I mean, we have the Globus subscriber group and we add them. I don't have the ability to take them out. All I can do is reject them. And so my list is getting longer and longer over time. So wish list.
Like Lev is jumping up and down there, just, you know, adding
So,
to your.
Todd from Michigan.
Yeah. Yep. Take fair ask and should be done. So, yeah. So if they're on the microphone, everybody can hear them, right? I don't have to repeat.
Yeah,
the
you don't have
question.
to repeat that anymore. Yes.
This is Joshua Brown from ORNL, and I had a question. You talked about CI/CD and support for that in the future. So what about containers and containerization of Globus? Is that in the roadmap as well?
Yes, so there has been some initial efforts towards containerization on that, and yes, certainly I think that is going to be part of the strategy to provide something that's easy to deploy and manage.
We are right on time.
Yeah.
This is
This is unprecedented. So,
and the weather is in the 80s, so we're living in a parallel universe. Any other questions in the room?
do you want to check online one more time? Are we close?
Check. Aha. forever data, how long would it last today, in the future, and how much would it cost?
Oh, man. Like, is that the question?
That's the question, yes.
Isn't that like the million-dollar question, right? Of like what data to preserve and how long you keep it? And I mean, from our I guess I'll speak sort of from a research perspective. So from the discussions and from the policies that are coming out from the funders, right? It's pretty clear that they're looking for reproducibility and making sure that the data that is used is made available and doesn't die in silos. So I think all of that is great, but there definitely does remain a question of, a judgment call in terms of what data gets stored for how long and how accessible it remains, and what tiers of storage do you keep in, right? So people who run HBSS archives or other archive solutions know they just keep growing and figuring out what is there. So that's a hard question to answer. I think researchers and communities come together. I think the biomedical space has done a pretty good job there. They think a lot about what data is kept and how it is kept in other communities. The climate community, we just replicated this huge bunch of data that we know is needed for modeling in the long term, but definitely thinking about the needs of the data. Is it relevant and reproducible? Is it relevant for other studies? Will it be used for analysis? On the other hand, I think I've also heard about it should be cheap to store this. You never know how it's going to be used. So let's put it out there, right? But can you find it if you just start it and put it? So metadata on that becomes really critical, being, putting it out there. So big question. I don't have great answers. It's certainly a huge challenge for the whole community to figure out, how do we store this? Who pays for it? How do institutions and universities support it? So lots of open questions there. So hopefully some fun conversations over that.
Yeah, I've heard people say that fundamentally any data management problem reduces to search. Yeah. So we have one more. Was there an announcement about the V4 to V5 migration tools, and where are they? So where are the tools, the migration tools? For?
They are linked off of the document. So maybe someone can post a response with a link to the migration guide on Zoom, please. Somebody from our team. Thank you, Bridget.
Okay, a couple of minutes over. Thank you very much. For those tweeting, those are the coordinates. I'm sure you found them already. I do want to thank our sponsors. Again, great to see everybody in person, of course, and appreciate folks coming out. We have a new sponsor, the Burwood Group, local firm. Thank you for your support. Internet 2, we've worked closely with that group for many years now, and it's great to have them back supporting us here again. SpectraLogic, one of our earliest storage partners, is back, and Wasabi is another fairly recent addition. So thank you to all our silver sponsors. And then iRods and Kerasoft, who have also been longtime supporters of the Globus effort, are back as bronze sponsors, and we have a new sponsor in Kerasoft, who is helping us drive adoption of Google Drive and Google Cloud storage solutions in the federal and educational market.